analyzed. But it was not a complete flying example, and in mid-1953, U.S. authorities launched Operation Moolah to try and snare one. They dropped thousands of leaflets over North Korean territory, offering $100,000 to any pilot who would fly to South Korea and turn his MiG-15 over to the Americans. On September the 21st, after the war had come to an end, Lieutenant Ro Kun-suk landed this MiG-15 beast at Kimpo Airfield in South Korea to claim the reward. It was impounded, partially disassembled, and flown to Okinawa for a thorough flight testing program. Under the terms of the armistice, it was offered to its rightful owners, but no one came forward to claim it. An expert team from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio flew out to Okinawa to conduct the evaluation. The chief pilot was the legendary Major General Al Boyd, at one time the head of the flight test program at Edwards Air Force Base. Captain Tom Collins and Major Chuck Yeager, famous for being the first pilot to exceed the speed of sound, were the other two. The MiG accepted standard Air Force jet fuel and oil, but the hydraulic fuel had to be made up. It was a mixture of glycerine, castor oil, and water. The instrument panel had to be relabeled in English, and the pilots needed to become familiar with the placement of the instruments. The originals, which were metric, were replaced by American versions. The team was accompanied by a large group of technicians from the Air Technical Intelligence Center. They checked the aircraft minutely before its first flight. The North Korean markings were removed and replaced with the standard USAF insignia. There was concern that the MiG may have been booby-trapped, and part of the technical checking process aimed to eliminate that possibility. There was a sense of urgency about getting the flight test program underway because of the possibility that North Korea might claim the MiG back. A special adapter plug was made up to connect a standard U.S. Air Force starting unit to the MiG's engine. A couple of additions to the MiG's equipment were made for the purpose of the tests. An accelerometer, not standard on the MiG, was added, and so was an external air temperature gauge. Preliminary taxi tests came first, and the braking system was checked thoroughly. The MiG-15 did not have a steerable nose wheel, and the pilot turned it during taxi by using differential braking of the main wheels. The brakes were operated pneumatically, and the system was fed from a compressed air bottle. There was no compressor, so the bottle could run out if the pilot wasn't careful, leaving the aircraft with no brakes. The compressed air bottle was also the source of emergency power for the flaps and landing gear. Captain Tom Collins drew the privilege of making the first flight in the MiG-15. On takeoff, the MiG easily outdistanced its two F-86 chase planes, demonstrating the effect of its lower weight and thrust loading. It also climbed much faster. On the first flight, the tests were restricted to low altitude and medium speeds. Behavior during landing was analyzed. Landing characteristics were found to be straightforward and fairly comparable to the Lockheed Shooting Star. The arrangement of the MiG-15's cannon on a tray underneath the air intake impressed the Americans with its simplicity and ease of reloading. The package held both guns and ammunition, and a new one could be fitted and positioned accurately by one person. Turnaround time between missions was therefore short. The MiG came fully combat ready, loaded with ammunition, so controlled weapon tests were possible. Al Boyd and Chuck Yeager explored the outer limits of the MiG's performance envelope. They put it through a series of dives from high altitude. At speeds above Mach 0.92, the aircraft became uncontrollable and could only be pulled out when lower altitudes and denser air were reached. What the Americans didn't know at the time was that the MiG's flight manual restricted speed to Mach 0.92. On later versions, an automatic air brake was released when speed reached Mach 0.91. As the tests continued, the comparative performance of the MiG-15 and the F-86 became clear. There was no doubt that the Sabre had higher top speed, but the MiG had lower weight and thrust loading. It could therefore climb much faster and reach higher altitudes. The MiG could reach 45,000 feet, 4 minutes faster than the Sabre. It had a ceiling of 55,000 feet compared with the Sabre's limit of 51. The Sabre's higher speed was neutralized to some extent because most operational combat took place at about Mach 0.7. In those days, the thrust ratio of all fighter aircraft was low by today's standards. Because of this, speed dropped off quickly in aerial combat. Not until the F-100 and the Mig-19 came along did the issue of transonic performance become really important. The American pilots also complained that the MiG's control system needed constant attention, and the heating and cooling system of the cockpit were almost ineffective, causing loss of pilot efficiency at extremes of heat and cold. Russian pilots find both these points difficult to understand. In Russian, the popular name for the MiG-15 is Samolyot Soldat, a soldier's aircraft, because of its friendly handling qualities. Russian pilots have to operate in wide climatic extremes, and designers pay close attention to the efficiency of environmental control. The Russian conclusion is that the MiG tested by the Americans had a faulty system. It's impossible to say which aircraft was superior. The MiG and the Sabre reflect very different philosophies about fighter aircraft, but overall they were very evenly matched. MiG test pilot Valery Minitsky said that fighter development should have stopped with the MiG-15 and the F-86.
We will Recovery Channel.
The MiG-15 was followed by the MiG-17. It was not a successor in a true sense, because both aircraft remained in service together for many years. In terms of production numbers, the 17 was even more successful than the 15. Eventually, about 9,000 were built, some under license in Poland and China. They were operated by the air forces of about 40 countries. The prototype of the MiG-17 flew for the first time in February 1950. It reached Mach 1.03 in a shallow dive, but then in another dive from 16,000 feet, it failed to recover. No reason for the accident was found. At first, the MiG-17 was fitted with the VK-1, the same engine as later MiG-15s. This was replaced by the higher thrust VK-1F, the first Soviet jet engine to be fitted with an afterburner. The angle of wing sweep was increased to 45 degrees, 10 degrees more than the MiG-15. It had 3 fences on each wing, as against the MiG-15's 2. The first operational aircraft were delivered to the Soviet Air Force in October 1952. Like the Mig-15, the Mig-17 appeared in many different versions. The radar-equipped Mig-17PF became the standard interceptor of the Soviet Air Force. The Mig-17PFU was the first operational aircraft equipped with air-to-air beam-riding guided missiles. Its radar aiming site was located in a lip on the upper intake. The control system was new. The elevators had an irreversible hydraulic booster so that the pilot would experience no feedback from the control surfaces. Western intelligence authorities had to wait much longer to see a MiG-17 up close than had been the case with the MiG-15. It wasn't until 1965, when a Syrian pilot defected to Israel, that the opportunity occurred. Shortly after that, a group of MiG-17s were intercepted by Israeli Mirages, herded to the ground and captured. 2 were retained and used to carry out sneak attacks on Arab targets in Egypt and Syria. In recent years, MiG-17s have begun to appear in even greater numbers as sports aircraft in Western countries, particularly the USA and Great Britain. This one flies out of Burlington, Vermont, and appears regularly at air shows on the east coast of the US. It's been stripped down and restored and given paintwork with a gloss never seen on service aircraft. The MiG-15 and the MiG-17 were vital to the MiG Design Bureau and to Artem Mikoyan himself. They were major successes for MiG and established new principles of mass production and transonic design. Their success also brought the means to explore new design approaches and the motivation to develop new techniques. They opened the way to a future that would radically change the design of fighter aircraft around the world.
Coming up next, they're the fastest and sleekest around. High-speed fighters and planes on wings. Then excitement and adventure. Mother Nature goes wild as the animal kingdom struts its stuff on Wild Discovery. Only on the Discovery Channel.